The old MG ZS was very cheap, and that meant it was a very popular alternative to budget SUVs like the Dacia Duster. But the truth is, it wasn't actually very good. It had a bumpy ride, an awkward driving position, and it also lacked some important modern safety aids. Well, this new version is designed to rectify all of those shortcomings without dramatically increasing the price. It's even become a hybrid for better fuel economy. Now, some manufacturers play fast and loose with the term hybrid. You might have seen there's a hybrid version of the Ford Puma and Peugeot 2008, for example. But those cars are actually mild hybrid. And that means that the electrical assistance is tiny and any fuel economy and performance benefits very, very small. This new ZS, though, is a full hybrid, which means it has a 134 brake horsepower electric motor that is fed by a 1.8 kilowatt hour battery, and it can even drive itself along using just battery power for short distances. It's a similar setup to the one we've seen in the MG3 that was launched earlier this year, although of course this is a bigger and heavier car, so it isn't quite as thrifty on fuel. It is still pretty efficient though. So officially, this has fuel economy of 55.4 mpg, and it emits 115 grams of CO2 every kilometre. On the other hand, there are some small full hybrid SUVs like the Renault Captur and the Toyota Yaris Cross that aren't as fast as this car. We'll talk more about performance later on, but both of those cars can officially top 60 mpg. Now, if you're wondering when the fully electric version of the new ZS will be arriving, well, there won't actually be one. There was an electric version of the old ZS, of course. It was called the ZS EV, and it was really popular with buyers looking for a cheap, practical, fully electric SUV. Don't worry though, because MG will be launching another fully electric SUV that's about the same size as this. We don't know what it will be called yet, but we do know it'll be based on the MG4. But while there won't be a fully electric version of the new ZS, there will be a regular petrol with no hybrid assistance at all. And actually, in our experience with small hatchbacks and small SUVs like this, the regular petrol versions often make more financial sense. That's because the difference in real-world fuel economy isn't necessarily huge, and the hybrid version often costs thousands of pounds more to buy. Now, we don't necessarily know if that will be the case here because, of course, fuel economy and prices for the regular petrol ZS haven't been announced yet. It's due in 2025, but it certainly is the case with some other small SUVs like the Renault Captur and the Nissan Juke, where the hybrid versions are actually pretty hard to recommend. Anyway, what about the equipment you get as standard? Because MG tends to be pretty generous on that front. Well, there are only two trim levels. There's SE, which is what this car is, and then there's Trophy. Even if you go for SE, you'll get 17-inch alloys, automatic LED headlights, rear parking sensors with a rear view camera, keyless entry and start, and automatic climate control. The Trophy adds artificial leather seats, heated in the front and electrically adjustable for the driver, a heated steering wheel, a 360-degree parking camera, bigger 18-inch alloys and tinted rear windows. And actually, MG expects 80% of buyers to go for that top trim. Now, the old ZS was pretty stingy when it came to safety equipment. You didn't even get automatic emergency braking. This new version though, no matter which trim level you go for, you'll get a full suite of modern safety aids, including not only automatic emergency braking, but also things like blind spot monitoring and rear cross traffic alert. The only thing we can't tell you is how well it's likely to protect you or your family in an accident, because at the time of filming, Euro NCAP hadn't yet published its crash test report. Bit of a London theme when it comes to paint colours, because if you don't want white, which is the only standard colour, then you'll have to pay £545 for either Monument Silver, Battersea Blue, Hampstead Grey, Black Pearl, or you can pay £695 for this dynamic red. Now let's talk about practicality, because that was one of the best things about the old ZS. And this new car is bigger, so it's slightly taller, slightly wider, and about 10 centimetres longer, to the point that it's now actually slightly longer than a Nissan Qashqai. The boot, though, is slightly smaller than before. So it has shrunk by 5 litres to 445 litres, and that is because of the hybrid system that lurks beneath this boot floor, and the hybrid system is also responsible for this curious looking box here behind the rear seats. 445 litres is still a very good sized boot though. It's bigger than what you'll find in a Peugeot 2008 and a Ford Puma as well, unless you factor in the huge well under that car's main boot floor. And you also get a height adjustable boot floor as standard. And there is even better news when you get in the back here, because for starters, interior quality doesn't tail off too dramatically. Yes, it's all hard here, but because of the way it's been textured with this faux stitching here, it's only when you touch it that you realise it's hard. It doesn't look at all cheap or low rent. But the best thing about this interior is how spacious it is. As you can see, very unusually, I have several inches between the top of my head and the ceiling, so I can sit bolt upright absolutely fine. And I've got plenty of knee room as well. This seat is set up for my driving position. I'm just over 6 feet tall and don't feel at all cramped back here. I've even got plenty of foot space, and this front seat is set as low as it will go. There is a small hump on the floor here, but when you need to squeeze 3 people in the back of the ZS, it doesn't get in the way too much of the feet of the middle passenger. And also, you have nice tall side windows here at the side. They let loads of light in, they give you a good view out, and because of this lightly coloured ceiling here, it doesn't feel at all claustrophobic back here. Now, in some small SUVs like the Renault Captur, you can slide the seats back and forth. In others, you can adjust the angle of the backrest. You can't do either of those things in the ZS. These seats are completely fixed. So that's a bit of a shame perhaps, but when you consider how much space there is back here, then it's a pretty minor complaint. Now, interior quality was actually one thing that was quite good about the old MG ZS. Okay, it wasn't amazing inside, it wasn't exactly a BMW, but given its low price, it actually felt pretty solid inside. There were some quite nice materials around the interior, so it did feel a cut above similarly priced small SUVs like the Dacia Duster, for example. And it's a similar story with this new version. So, as you can see up here, you've got some artificial leather with mock stitching, some squidgy materials up there. There is some fabric on the other side of the dashboard. That's a reasonably nice touch. And as I said earlier, if you go for an SE trim car, which is what this is, then you get fabric seats. But if you go for a range-topping trophy model, then you get artificial leather down here. And it all feels well put together. It feels nice and solid. Not going to blow you away with its interior quality, but given this car's low price, I'll talk more about that later on, then I think MG's done a pretty good job in here. And even some of the harder materials up here on the top of the doors, for example, as you can see, or here rather, this is all hard, but because of the way it's been textured and because it's been molded to make it look like it has stitching on it, so it could be a piece of leather up there, but it doesn't look at all cheap, so that is a nice touch. It's not all good news though, because the driving position doesn't really work for me that well. So the problem is that I can move the steering wheel up and down, but I can't move it in or out. So that means that I have to make a compromise. I have to sit a little bit closer to the pedals than I'd ideally like to, and a little bit further away from the steering wheel. If I could move the steering wheel towards me, then I would have a comfortable driving position. Now, that won't be a problem for everyone, but it is something worth bearing in mind. And if you're thinking about buying a new ZS, then you might want to pop along to a dealer to check you can get comfortable behind the wheel. And it's a bit of a shame that that was a problem with the old ZS and that it hasn't been rectified with this new version. The second problem with the driving position are these seats. So they don't have a huge amount of lower back support, and there is no adjustable lumbar support available in any version of the ZS to remedy that. So on a longer journey, then I do feel a little bit of backache setting in. We've done about an hour behind the wheel so far, and that was already starting to happen. On the plus side, this doesn't just feel like a hatchback from behind the wheel, it does feel like an SUV. You sit quite high up, similarly far from the road, I'd say, than you do in something like a Nissan Qashqai. And also visibility is very good. So you've got nice, tall side windows here, relatively slim upright pillars, and you've got a good view down the road as well. Storage space is also not too bad. These trays here around the gear lever, they're quite shallow, but useful for throwing your phone, a wallet, or the car's key. You have 2 cup holders between the front seats here, and that has a movable partition, so you can adjust it for either slim cups or bigger ones. There is also some further storage under the central armrest here, and the door pockets, they are quite big, easily big enough for 2 or 3 of these 500ml bottles of water. There's even a small tray up here above the glove box. One other thing I want to show you is this new infotainment system. So whichever version of the new ZS you go for, you will get this 12.3-inch touchscreen, and it has been angled up slightly to make it easier for me, the driver, or my passenger to see. And that sounds very good. The problem is that it can reflect the sunlight quite badly. So when you're driving along the road, depending on how bright it is and where the sun is coming from, it can be quite difficult to actually see this screen and some of the smaller icons on it. Also, although swiping between different menus, this reacts quite quickly. Hopping between one function to another, so for example, if I go to the air conditioning menu there, then it does take quite a long time sometimes to do that. Now there are some shortcut buttons along the bottom here for doing things like adjusting the volume and turning off and on the air conditioning, but adjusting the air conditioning requires me to use this touchscreen here. And that's not necessarily too much of a problem. Of course, we would like some physical controls for that, but when I'm using MG's native operating system, at least that's relatively easy. But if I'm using Apple CarPlay, which I do nearly all the time when I'm driving along, that comes as standard on the new ZS, then I have no way of adjusting the temperature. There is a shortcut button on the steering wheel here, which I've configured for hopping straight to the air conditioning menu. But if I'm in Apple CarPlay, it doesn't work. So what I have to do is I have to go back into the native operating system, adjust the temperature, and then go back into Apple CarPlay. So to be honest, that's a bit of a faff, and it's a shame you can't do things like adjusting the air conditioning when you're using Apple CarPlay. But is this new version of the ZS any better to drive than its predecessor? So some pretty big improvements so far then. Is it the same story with the way the MG ZS drives? Well, it's a bit mixed to be honest, but let's start with the positives, because the performance that this car offers is actually very good. So when the electric motor and the petrol engine are working together, when you put your foot down hard, then acceleration is actually really strong. This car has a total of 194 brake horsepower and it can do 0 to 60 in 8.7 seconds. So it's way faster than any version of the Renault Captur or Dacia Duster, and about as quick as a range-topping EcoBoost 155 version of the Ford Puma. So as I say, by small SUV standards, performance is certainly very good. Less convincing is ride comfort. It was a weakness of the old car, and it is of this new version, I'm afraid. Things are at their worst around town on poorly surfaced roads, as you might expect, because you're jostled around quite a lot. There's no real sophistication to the damping that this car offers. And although things improve when you're out on a more undulating road like the one we're on now, still, this is not among the most comfortable small SUVs you can buy. A Dacia Duster is more comfortable, as is a Renault Captur. And also, there's quite a lot of road noise. You can hear the tyres slapping away at the surface of the road quite noticeably when you get above 40 miles an hour. I'm not sure if that's an inherent problem with the car or the Kumo tyres that this is shod with, but it's certainly something that you're aware of more than in a lot of other small SUVs. And I wish I could say that the fact this car is quite noisy and the ride isn't particularly comfortable meant that it handled brilliantly, but really, I'm afraid that isn't the case either, because there's a curious vagueness around the first few degrees of lock on the steering. So you find yourself making quite big movements and soaring away at the wheel to make minor adjustments to your positioning on the road. And really, you should only have to move the steering wheel very slightly. And then when you do wind on more lock and the car starts to change direction, the weighting changes and the steering gets very heavy very quickly. It's quite unnatural in the way that it happens, and it doesn't encourage you to drive quickly, and it doesn't reward you when you do so, which is a shame, because actually body control in this car is quite good. It stays fairly level, even if there isn't actually that much grip. Again, I think those Kumo tyres might be partly to blame for that. So overall, this car is better to drive than the old ZS, but it isn't anywhere near as good as the best small SUVs out there. So let's talk about money, because that is probably still the biggest draw of the MG brand. It tends to undercut equivalent cars from rival mainstream manufacturers. And that is indeed the case here. So this entry-level SE model costs just under £22,000. And even if you want the range-topping trophy, then you'll only be spending around £24,500. So the most expensive version of the new ZS costs less than the cheapest versions of cars like the Ford Puma and the Peugeot 2008, which are both smaller than this. You can have a Renault Captur for less money, but it won't be a hybrid version, and it will have a lot less standard equipment. And when you factor in the 7-year, 80,000 mile warranty that this comes with as standard, then you have to say it's pretty exceptional value for money. It's just a shame it isn't a bit better to drive. Thanks for watching. We hope you've enjoyed this video. If you have, please do give it a like. If you want to watch another one, click up there. And for our full detailed written review of the new MG ZS, click there.